Sheri Few is up next. Ms. Few, welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate you hearing my testimony today. My name is Sheri Few, and I'm the president of United States Parents Involved in Education, and I'm here today to speak on behalf of USPI Action in support of House Bill 4605. This comprehensive bill will not only address teaching tenets of critical race theory, but will also address other critical theories and woke ideologies being forced on teachers and students of South Carolina schools. Critical race theory's origin is Marxist. Marxists believe that the workers of the world must unite and free themselves from capitalist oppression. To make communism a reality, in 1923, Marxists founded the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany, also known as the Frankfurt School, where they developed critical theory. Critical theory is a social theory oriented toward critiquing and changing society. Over the last century, many social scientists and philosophers who rose to prominence after the Frankfurt School have adopted the goals and tenets of critical theory. We can recognize critical theory today in approaches to conducting social science. There is critical race theory, critical cultural theory, critical gender theory, critical queer theory, critical media theory, just to name a few. During World War II, the Frankfurt School was forced out by the Nazis and moved to Columbia University in New York City. This is when John Dewey became so influential in education. Dewey is considered the leading education philosopher in the 20th century and is reported to have said, "You can't make socialists out of individualists. Children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective society which is coming, where everyone is interdependent." In the 1990s, Gloria Ladson-Billings created a more palatable form of critical race theory called culturally responsive learning, from which you've heard others testify, that is being taught in South Carolina schools. This pedagogy incorporates several of the critical theories. USC College of Education professor Dr. Gloria Boutte and some of her students who testified before you in defense of critical race theory a few weeks ago. And Dr. Boutte has written this book, which I brought with me. It's titled Educating African American Students. In her chapter on culturally responsive learning, she has a table that includes groups who are oppressed and those who are oppressors. The oppressor group is white, heterosexual male with good socioeconomic status, and even Christians are identified as oppressors, while every other race, women, LGBTQ, people of low socioeconomic status, and what she terms minority religions are oppressed. Dr. Boutte has trained teachers in Kershaw County School District, where I reside, and this book is the main text for an African American Studies course she helped them to develop. This form of pedagogy is what's being taught in South Carolina schools, along with federally incentivized social emotional learning and the advancement of equity and inclusion. I have researched 9 school districts in the state, and every one of them have evidence of critical theories, with an attempt to make social justice warriors out of South Carolina students. This indoctrination of children must end. House Bill 4605 will end indoctrination on the taxpayer's dime and protect children and our country's freedom. I urge you to give your full support to House Bill 4605 with the amendments offered by the bill's author, Eric Epstein. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Few. Representative Govan, you take a question, Ms. Few, from Representative Govan.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Few, I noted that you were speaking specifically in terms of one of our higher ed professionals and whatnot, but let me ask you this. What is your definition of critical race theory?
I think I just said that. I just spent 3 minutes defining what it is.
I
It's
just wanna
based
be-
on a critical theory, which is Marxist, that came out of the Frankfurt School in Germany, and then moved to the United States, and that's where the concept bloomed.
So your concept of critical race theory is simply that it's Marxist, it came here from another country, and therefore this is the boogeyman in the room?
No, of course not. Why would I agree to that? I just gave you facts, history that I have researched, is well documented. And it's a theory called critical theory, and the attempt with the critical part is to criticize societies so that they can affect change. And that is the entire goal with critical theory. And that's why I say it's about our country's freedom, because it is the end goal of these theories to divide our country and separate us so that we are pitted against one another, and eventually the end goal is to change our form of government.
Okay, then, so just based on that premise, and you talk about the division in this country and people being pitted against one another, then, would you agree that this didn't exist during the time period in which this country engaged in an enormous conflict called the Civil War? Was that not a situation in which this country was divided and individuals were pitted against each other?
I think we've come a long way since the Civil War. And I believe that critical race theory violates the Civil Rights Act. And it is an illegal thing to be taught, and it should be punishable.
Okay, then, and at this particular point in time, since we've come such a long way, I think we heard in previous testimony, I would imagine that you do not believe in systemic racism.
No, I don't.
You don't believe systemic racism exists in this country?
No, I don't.
Okay, do you believe racism exists in this country?
Of course it does. Of course it does. I feel that people are racist toward me because I'm white. There is racism. And I'd appreciate it if the audience would quit laughing at me. That's unacceptable. These are my opinions. I have the right to state my opinion. And I think the young people in the background that are laughing are a perfect example of what we're churning out, especially in our colleges and universities. They've been fully indoctrinated. They're not taught to love their country. We're the only country in the world that doesn't teach their children patriotism. We teach them to hate their country, and things like systemic racism is a way of making that happen.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and I'll defend those young people in the back, yes, they are our future. Maybe they do things or say things. I have 4 probably around their age, and I can tell you that even though I may not agree with my children all the time and they have their ways of doing things, that they are independent thinkers and they have that right, just as I did, to develop those opinions and whatnot based on actually the actions of those of us who we call ourselves adults and who should know better. And if you look at the course of history and some of the things that we've done as adults, we haven't always set the best examples in the world. We do the best we can, but I just tread very lightly in terms of criticizing those folks in the back.
I would appreciate if they had more respect for some of us.
I think respect is important, but just as I'm respecting you, getting back to my question though, in terms of the treatment of history and systemic racism, again, am I to understand you to believe then that there, as a result of things that have been done in the past, actions and whatnot, that they do not have repercussions in terms of things that exist today that perhaps we're not so proud of?
I think America has made mistakes in the past, and I've never suggested, or I don't think anyone else that is a proponent of these bills suggests that we don't teach the things in our history that were not good. No one is suggesting that. But we should not focus on grievances and things that divide our country. We are the United States of America. I love our country, and I think our children should be taught the same thing, and not be looked at by their different classes or their different races or their different gender identities and all of these other groups of people. And that's how it's Marxist at its roots, because that's what the Marxist theory does, is it pits one group against another in order to cause division.
So if we have a different orientation, different background, how can you deny that? If we're a diverse nation, how can we not discuss our differences in terms of laying the foundation for a future of understanding if we can't even sit down at a table and critically discuss issues, our past, our differences, things we agree on and disagree on, we agree on and disagree on?
I think that's an
I
adult
think
conversation.
Dr. Scott, I think, alluded to that earlier in terms of his testimony.
Yes, and like I said, I think that's an adult conversation. It's not something that should be force-fed to children. I think children should be taught to love one another, to respect one another, and to appreciate their differences, but in the end, they are one. We are one country. They are American children that go to America's schools, and that's how they should identify.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Gatch.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Ms. Few, Representative Govan said he wanted to come to their defense. Well, I'm going to come to yours.
Thank you.
Did you laugh or snicker when those of the other people were expressing a view that was diametrically opposed to yours?
No,
Did you scoff?
no,
Did you snicker?
no.
Did you do anything disrespectful?
I might have rolled my eyes, but I don't know if they could see it.
I don't think I could hear it.
I'm going to be honest, I may have rolled my eyes.
I think that type of respect is how we as a civilized society, when we disagree about such emotionally charged issues, we have to show each other that respect. I appreciate you doing that. I am disappointed at those who are laughing. I understand that people have their deep-rooted opinions about these things that go back far longer than I can ever imagine. But if we're going to go forward, if we're going to get somewhere, if we aren't going to devour each other in the trenches outside the State House, we have to figure out a way to bridge the gap.
Amen.
We all have, I think that what you're saying is that we all have our opinions, we all have our ideological preferences, we all come from different backgrounds, religions, we had different parents, we had different upbringings, we had different amounts of money in the bank account. We are so different from each other. We have to figure out a way to find commonality, and I think that starts with trying to respect each other as humans. That's where it begins. And I appreciate you having the courage to come up and say something to people that you realize, you know, there's going to be people who disagree with you. And it does take a lot of courage to do that. And it's not just for people who have your view, it's for the people who have the other view as well. It does take courage to come up here and speak. But I think having the utmost respect for people, having the utmost respect for each other is really key if we're going to move forward in this. Thank you.
Well, Representative Gatch,
Thank
if
Thank
I
you.
might,
Can I
if I might
Just a
bring
moment,
to,
please.
if I might bring to Mr.
I have not
Gatch's
called on
attention
Representative Govan.
that when in
Representative
previous
Govan.
testimony that he showed such concern
Representative
when there
Govan.
was an outburst
Representative
speaking
Govan.
in favor of critical race theory, that he didn't raise those same
Representative Govan.
concerns. So I would be very careful to tread there or go there since I'm
Representative
being used
Govan,
as a
you have
foil.
not been called on. There are two people before you. You need to control yourself.
I'm in perfect control of myself, but I will
Well-
not sit here and be tolerated and used as a foil
Well,
by Representative
you
Gatch
have not been
in terms
called
of
on,
testimony.
Representative Govan.
And if
I
he
would
wants to
appre-
talk about respect, then that needs to be
Representative
across the
Govan,
board.
would you kindly be quiet?
If you,
Representative Smith has a question, and that is what? When you get called on, I will be glad to call on you, but do not inject yourself into a conversation that is going on unless you're called on.
well, Madam Chair,
Representative
you do
Smith has a
recognize-
question. Representative Govan,
And
please.
again, Madam Chair, with all due respect.
With all due
Mr.
respect to
Gatch-
you, you
Mr.
have
Gatch
said what you were
used
going
me
to.
as a foil, and I really will not tolerate that. He was being disrespectful,
Representative Govan, you have an
and I will
opinion.
not tolerate that.
Representative Gatch has, and I will not tolerate you staying and being disrespectful to me. Thank you. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and audience and fellow colleagues. I'm very sorry about what we just witnessed here. In light of that, I have no questions. Thank you for your testimony, and I'm sorry you witnessed that.
Thank you, Representative Smith. And
Representative Rivers, you have a question?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a couple of questions. Ma'am, you said about being devalued, and and I agree with you, that you consider that to be wrong, correct? Someone's being devalued,
Yes,
okay? And you also said we should love the United States,
yes,
okay? I guess my question then and you believe in equality,
I do.
okay?
Equal opportunity under the law, not equity.
Equal opportunity for all, right?
Of course.
And I guess my question, listening to you, and as a woman, and you talk about equality, and I find it a little bit ironic that you're defending the United States when they didn't allow you as a woman to vote until 1920. You know, and so when you talk about equality for all, and there's no superiority and there's no classes, it just seems ironic that the people that gave life wasn't even given an opportunity to participate in the process by somebody. And these are the people who some say are supremacy or whatever the word is, but your own, let me say it a different way. People own husbands, brothers, didn't allow them to vote until 1920 because we couldn't vote. Black people couldn't vote. So when you talk about equality in the United States, united means everybody. And there are some who think that it's still not for everybody, but definitely it wasn't for everybody until 1920. So I take that back. It wasn't even 1920. That was just for women. So my question is, how can you reconcile saying that some people that you're against being devalued, and you also said you're for freedom? Am I correct?
Absolutely.
So my question to you then is, how would somebody who's never, let me say it a different way, who has always been free, someone who has always been free, know what it's like to not be free? Could you explain that for me, please?
Well, first of all, to address women's voting rights, that obviously is a problem that has been eradicated, as have many problems in our country, when the leaders of our country saw fit to do the right thing. And that's why I'm proud of our country, because we do have flaws and mistakes in our past. But I think fundamentally, you know, we have Christian values in this country, and we eventually hear the leading of God and we correct our mistakes, and we feel remorseful for the things we've done wrong. But my point to you is that the goal should be for our country, for us to be united and not see ourselves as separate entities, separate identities. And I believe that is an intentional agenda, as I've stated before. It's a Marxist agenda to divide our country. And a house divided against itself will surely fall. And you know this.
Yes, ma'am, but my question about the freedom part, about those who have always been free, saying about losing their freedom, what you're saying inherently is that what I'm used to, I don't want you to have.
So have you always been free, Representative Rivers?
History.
I'm talking about you personally.
I'm free in spirit, but not
Okay.
free. I'm free in spirit because
Right.
that's spiritual. But we're not talking about a spiritual thing. Now, we're talking about what actually happened throughout history. 'Cause we can
Throughout
read-
history, but you asked me how I felt about freedom and
No,
how
my-
anybody who had not been free before,
Right.
right? So you and I both have always experienced freedom.
No, not
You
my
personally?
ancestors. No.
I'm not talking about your ancestors.
I came
I'm
from
talking about
somebody.
you and me.
We came from somebody.
You and
though.
I.
We didn't come out of test tube.
I don't follow your line of questioning. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, sometimes we get conveniently, maybe I didn't explain it correctly. All I'm saying to you again, I don't want you
Well,
to
let me just say
Let me
just
ask the
say this
question so
about.
you can answer it. And then
Okay,
I'm
well, I
gonna-
was going to rephrase my answer from the last question
That's
because I know you
wanna
want to
make
know
sure I
about freedom.
ask my question in a way that you can understand it so that we won't be here all night.
Okay.
So my question again is, to individuals who've always had freedom, and I don't want to use race, even though we're talking about critical race theory, so let me go there, since we're talking about race. Black people who had to fight for freedom. You're telling me that those people are equal to people who have always had freedom. And it's kind of hard for me to reconcile how somebody who's always had something is equal to somebody who's trying to get something.
Okay.
And that's my question for you.
Okay, great. And I understand your question. And I think I responded before about the goal should be unity, despite what's happened in the past. But specifically about freedom, when I talk about protecting our freedom as a country, our freedom, all of us sitting here today, we live in a free country. People are flocking to get in our country because we have a wonderful country and they want the same opportunities we have, the freedoms that we experience, unlike people in Ukraine and Russia and China. You know, I'm talking about that kind of freedom. I'm talking about not changing our form of government from a constitutional republic to a socialist, Marxist, and even communist country where we lose our freedoms. And that's what I mean when I say that I want to protect children from critical theory, which is Marxist in origin and has the goal of that, of changing our society, our form of government. I want to protect children from that, and I want to protect our country's freedom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Few, I have one more question for you. Representative Henderson Myers.
Thank you, Ms. Few. You had stated that Eric Epstein is the author of these bills. Who is Eric Epstein?
His name is actually pronounced Eric Epstein.
Epstein, okay.
And he is an architect that lives in Summerville, South Carolina. He has experienced the effects of critical race theory not only through his children's classroom, but also at his workplace. And so he has done undue research and looked at the legal underpinnings in the legislation that he's written. And I think you would all benefit from hearing from him and asking him specific questions about the legal underpinnings of the legislation he's written.
Okay, and is it your position that critical race theory is being taught in our schools?
Culturally relevant pedagogy is being taught in our schools. And that is the Gloria Ladson's Billings form of it that incorporates not only critical race theory, but critical queer theory, and all of the critical theories are encompassed in that pedagogy. And critical race theory is not a textbook, it's not a curriculum, it's not a standard. It's a pedagogy, which is a form and a method of teaching. And teachers have been trained in pre-service in the colleges and universities. They've taken outright critical race theory courses, but then they're trained in culturally relevant pedagogy and showing them how to teach it and embed it throughout the curriculum in South Carolina schools. That's what's happening in the Kershaw County School District, where I have FOIA'd information. And by the way, originally I was told I would be giving the training materials to prove that it wasn't critical race theory. And then when I asked for the materials, then I was told I had to FOIA them. And then when I FOIA'd them, I was denied them because they said that the slides by Dr. Gloria Boutte, the University of South Carolina professor, were proprietary. Even though our tax dollars paid for that training, I am not allowed to this day to see those PowerPoint presentations.
When did you FOIA them?
It's been a couple of months ago now. Okay. And I am actually considering a lawsuit because I've spoken with lawyers and it is illegal for them to withhold that information.
All right, well, everybody has their opinions.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative McDaniel.
Ms. Few. First, I want to thank you for coming before us. Do you know that I had the privilege to see some of the conversations that you all had regarding Dr. Boutte's book?
No.
Can you explain to me when you all discovered that the superintendent and the county council chair of Kershaw County and Kershaw County School District made the decision to utilize this booklet to teach African American studies? You didn't go to the superintendent and the county council chairman first and share you all's concerns regarding the fact that you didn't think the book was appropriate?
Well, let me fill you in on the facts. There was a school board meeting right after the George Floyd murder. And at that school board meeting, the superintendent mentioned
Hold on a
Councilman-
minute. When they talking on either side of me, I'm
Okay.
distracted, so I
Okay.
want to make sure I hear
Sure,
everything that
sure.
you're saying. Okay.
So
go
at
ahead.
that school board meeting, the superintendent announced that he and Councilman, it wasn't the chairman, but Councilman Sammy Tucker had gotten together and decided that the school district in the county wanted to do something to show the community, I'm just paraphrasing, that their perspective was sympathetic in this situation. And so what happened at that meeting was the chairman of the school board suggested that, actually, one school board member recommended a resolution, and then the chairman of the school board said, excuse me, I'm a little distracted too.
I know, I don't know where that came from.
Okay, so anyway, they decided, okay, the chairman of the school board said he wanted a resolution and an African-American studies course. So this was in a direct response to George Floyd's murder. This is how they were going to respond to it. So, to my knowledge, nobody agreed on this book. They just decided they were going to develop a course, and then that put it in the superintendent's hands, and the superintendent hired Dr. Boutte to come in and train the teachers and help write the course.
So when you went to them to have that conversation regarding the booklet, what happened?
Well, how this occurred, how I got interested in this, was the superintendent of education was invited to a Republican Party meeting in Kershaw County because he had heard that there were members of that party that were concerned about critical race theory. So he came to their meeting in an effort to convince everyone that it's not being taught in the Kershaw County schools. So I was present at the meeting, and that's when I asked him, well, he said, we're not teaching critical race theory, but we're teaching culturally responsive learning, or whatever he called it. It goes by 2 or 3 different names. And so I challenged him, and I said, sir, I know and understand that that is the same thing, that it's a version that's been made more palatable for K through 12 schools, and in my opinion is even worse because it incorporates
Okay,
all
can
the
I get
critical
you to maybe
theories.
just, it's going again.
Okay, so he
Okay.
said he would be more than glad, in front of all of those people, he would be more than glad to provide me the training materials so it would prove to me that it wasn't critical race theory. So I emailed him as he instructed I do, asked for the PowerPoint presentation, the training materials, and that's when I was told I had to FOIA it. And then after I FOIA'd it, I was told I couldn't have them, not that they didn't own them, but they couldn't release them because they're proprietary.
And Ms. Few, when I ask you a question, it's up to you to choose how you want to answer the question. So I would hope that my colleagues who may be distracted by your answers would give you the same respect that we're asking other folk to give and hear you out and how you choose to answer the question. But my question was, when you went to have that conversation with, or did you not have the conversation with the superintendent regarding your displeasure about the book? Because what I saw was you and some other individuals discussing the book in a room and going through, pointing out certain things that Dr. Boutte had listed in the book, and she wasn't there to have any means of expressing why she put in the book whatever she put in there. Because we know that anyone's perspective is their reality. And she have a right to write any book she want to write, and she have a right to put whatever in the book she want to put in it. And you have the right to have a concern as you did, but I thought it was somewhat alarming, the conversation that was being held between you and these other individuals going through the book, dissecting it, versus going to the superintendent and the school board if you felt that strongly about the book and having the book removed from being utilized as an African-American studies book.
Well, first of all, I have no idea what image you are talking about because
I'd be more
I've
than
never.
happy to share it with you.
Well, I'd be glad to see it because I've never been in a room with other people dissecting the book. That's never happened. I did do a presentation in Kershaw County, like I've done in about 9 other counties in the state, where we explain what critical race theory is and how to find it in their schools. So like when I went to Somerville, I researched Dorchester County Schools. And so in that presentation at the end, I gave the evidence that I found. So I did the same thing in the county where I live. That is the only time, perhaps publicly, that I've spoken about those things. Now, as far as going to the superintendent, when he refused to provide what I requested, I did find out about the book, and I don't approve of it, but I did speak to the school board. I spoke to the school board before I FOIA'd the information. And I invited every one of them to that presentation, and no one came. So I have provided opportunities for the school board and the superintendent to see what I've researched and debated if they'd like, but they're not willing to do that.
So none of them were interested in your concerns about the book, because apparently then they didn't have the same concerns that you had. Would you agree?
Yes, but I think it's because they're uninformed. They should have at least taken the opportunity to see what evidence I had.
So did you move forward to the state superintendent then if you had that kind of discomfort? And where I'm trying to go to here is, we once again are trying to legislate something that there are other avenues to deal with it other than legislating it. And if you're gonna hang around, I want you to see this, because I want to know if this really is not you in what I'm looking at. And I would be more than happy to apologize. But the book is Kershaw County, and where I received the information from as to how the book even came about was from that particular clipping. Because I had no earthly idea. Kershaw is not in my district, and I don't follow Kershaw. And when Mr. Representative Dabney was here, I was going to ask him about the setting, because it's appropriate, if there's something you don't like, to go to the persons who made the decision to authorize it, then go to a room and talk about it, and then coerce, if you will, because that may be what some people think of when they look at it, and it's some of what I thought when I looked at it, and just go through and just dissect the book without having her there to give her rationale as to why the book was written, which she didn't owe to anyone.
Representative McDaniel, I understand where you're going with that. I think that would be a good conversation that you and Ms. Few could have after the meeting, on she said, they said, that kind of thing. I understand where you're going. We have some other questions.
Can I ask my question? I was leading up to then, I skipped the dialogue and just continued.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Last question.
Okay, so my question then, in listening to the tape and the conversation, even to your testimony here, where you basically give an opinion as to what is and is not, and that CRT is Marxist. Well, what about these same individuals who would think that those folk who support CRT feel the same way? I mean, support anti-CRT feels the same way that it's Marxist. Because we're being told it's not taught in the schools. The state superintendent has said that she is looking into cases that have been brought to her attention where there may be some instances where it is occurring, just like anything in life. When there's wrong done, there's laws in place already to deal with it. There's
Is there a question in here?
I'm getting there, madam.
Okay.
Now you let my neighbor rampage over here for a long time, so let me.
No, I'm not timing anybody, but
Okay,
we're in a question.
Okay, well, we taking time now by you not letting me finish.
Yeah,
So,
well, I'm anxious for you to finish in the question.
well, Madam Chair, I wish we wouldn't even had this at all. But since we had it, I want to be able to get the information from the people who come to here to testify. And I mean, this is the only way we have to do it.
Go ahead and ask the question then.
So my question, I'm trying to get to, getting distracted and forgetting, and then have to come back to it again. But anyway, is the fact that there are avenues already in place. Would you agree to deal with these kinds of things when they occur? And if there's a book that you think that should not be taught, versus us putting legislation in place, which still would not guarantee that these things that are based on people's feelings, banning the books, not wanting to talk about the things that happen in this great state. And no, I don't always consider myself free. You look at this, you can look right here. I don't always consider myself free, but I deal with it by communicating with it and communicating about it. So don't you think that that would be a better avenue than us sitting here going back and forth about some bills that someone thought that we need to be discussing that don't even pertain to the state?
Well, let me answer your question. So I have had vast experience with this issue. I have worked with parents across the state who have tried to go and follow the proper protocol to no avail. Because like you said about the superintendent, which is also untruthful on her part, I have several pieces of evidence that prove that she has been dishonest about culturally relevant pedagogy and the tenets of critical race theory, not being taught, not being trained. I have the evidence. And also, I'm working on the national level. Our organization has 20 state chapters, and it's happening all over the country. The teachers, the schools, the districts, the school boards, the superintendents, they all say it's not being taught. So we've been there, done that. It's not effective, and that's the reason that these bills are before you.
And so now what's your training to say that what they're doing is inaccurate and not true? Because she said that when the cases
I have
come to her,
evidence.
she's investigating them.
When you and I get together, I'll show you the evidence I have.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
We have one more question, Ms. Few.
Okay.
Representative Morgan.
I'll try to go fast. Well, thank you for your testimony. Throughout most of this, even at the very first hearing, which was actually not a public hearing, it was us discussing, did you know that I brought up actually some of the things that you were discussing definitionally about what critical race theory is. And throughout this whole process, I've been confounded about this constant, you'll have one person testify and say, that's not what critical race theory is. Y'all don't even know what it is. Then the next person comes in and says, this is what it is. No, this is what it is. And everybody says, oh, we can't know the definition. And I'm like, we're here talking about social studies instruction. And it's like, I'm terrified because I'm like, we can definitionally look things up. We can go read these books. Like I actually been audiobooking lately, the critical race theory, the essential writings, which Kimberly Crenshaw is one of the authors of, to understand what they're saying and what they're meaning. But I feel like we're creating this world where we can't define it. And you actually, from my perspective, and I would challenge everybody, people that agree with me, disagree with me, think I'm an idiot, whatever, like go listen to what you just said, the laid out history of what critical theory comes from, philosophically, what it is, what it means. Listen, I mean, you can go YouTube hours. I have Kimberly Crenshaw interviews about where she wrote it and why she wrote it. And whether you agree or disagree, you can inform yourself about what these philosophies mean. And so did you know, I think you actually gave one of the best definitions of the history of it, where it comes from and what it means that we've heard. And so I would, like I said, I would just encourage everybody to read it. I almost want to ask you if you've read all those, but I won't because I have a feeling you have, or it sounds like you've at least read about them. But is it not accurate? You were talking about CRT more broadly, because we get trapped up on that, but you were talking about critical theories, which is actually the root of these bills as I read them, some of them. Don't you think we're getting confused by saying everything's critical race theory when in fact, really it's critical theories in every area?
Yes.
And wouldn't you say that it's the Marxist underpinnings of those, which really it's an ideology like any of us have ideologies that's pushing towards a goal. And as you said, is it not accurate to say the goal is to fundamentally alter society?
Yes.
So it could be good or bad, and we're all going to have different opinions of whether or not it's good or bad. But the agenda is to fundamentally alter society. In fact, Marxism and critical theory was to deconstruct systems, figure out how they go wrong, where they go wrong, how things are unequal. And
Do you have a question?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm asking her. Actually, I think I'm asking her if I'm saying the stuff correctly.
well.
But maybe I should be done. I guess the reason I hate to not be done is because we have literally not covered the most important thing in most of this hearing. We've not covered the most important stuff, which is what actually is critical theory. Where is it actually being taught? We've had a couple people touch on it, but a lot of it we get off on all these rabbit trails about just randomness that doesn't relate to the subject matter at hand in the bills. Anyway, so maybe I guess I'm looking forward to talking to you later about this. I'm actually meeting with people on both sides about this. There's people that are vehemently opposed. And would you not agree that the core point of you being here and of you trying to get CRT out and maybe the whole movement is to get indoctrination of children out of the schools from both sides, whether it's critical theory and Marxism or whether it's, some kind of far right theory that's trying to push some kind of political agenda to force kids to vote a certain kind of way?
I absolutely agree with that. Children should not be indoctrinated on anything. And it would be so valuable to the academics of this state if teachers were freed up to focus on core academics instead of all this nonsensical pedagogies that they're being forced to learn and then embed throughout the curriculum. You know, if they could focus on core academics instead of social emotional learning, culturally relevant pedagogy, and all of these nefarious pedagogies that are, again, incentivized by the federal government, I think we would see improved academic achievement and better teacher retention and recruitment.
And do you not also agree that based on the displays today from all of us, I'll throw me in there, the audience, the people up here, that this topic is explosive, emotional, overtly political, partisan, ideological, and this is exactly why we need to get some of this stuff and these kind of conversations that we can't even handle as adults, and we seem to struggle with this, get them out of the classroom and let kids actually learn.
Amen. That's me.
Thank you. We have one last question from Representative Henderson Myers, and then we need to move on. We are actually on number 9, and you will be here through 30 tonight.
Ms. Few.
Representative Myers.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Chairman. Ms. Few, you had mentioned something about equality and equity. You said you're for equality, but not for equity. How does that play into this conversation that we're having?
Well, equity is one of the primary concepts in critical race theory and critical theory in general, as we were just discussing. And so equity is different from equality. Again, equality is equal access under the law. Equity is about equal outcomes. So that if you implement equity in a K-12 situation, then you expect every child to have the same outcome, which is impossible without discrimination.
Well,
And I would suggest, even I would go further to say that equity is communist in theory. That's what communists believe in, is everybody having everything the same. And
Well,
that's just not what happens in a free society. Where
So
individuals,
how does that relate to critical race theory? How does that relate to someone being taught history or social studies, or someone being taught economics or anything like that? How does that relate to that?
well, that's a very good question, but the theory of equity as it applies to critical theories is that if a child is one of the oppressed categories, if you will, then they're going to need more resources, more attention, and this other group who's in the oppressor category are going to need less and fewer, so that the outcomes will be the same. And that's where discrimination comes in. Instead of treating every child as a child that is capable of learning, they're already categorizing certain individuals as oppressed and therefore needing extra resources.
Okay, hypothesize with me for a minute. Let's say you have a college-trained engineer. You have two. You have, both of them have just come out of school. You've got a male engineer who gets started, let's say there's a range of, I don't know, $42,000 to $50,000 a year starting salary. You have the male engineer that starts out at 50. You have the female engineer that starts out at 45. So already there you have some inequality there. Would you agree with me?
Certainly.
All things being equal.
Yes,
Okay.
I've always been a proponent of women doing the same jobs as men having the same pay.
And-
That has nothing to do with, I think, the discussion at hand.
Okay, and so, no, it does. It very much has something to do with it. Because you mentioned you don't believe in equity. And equity, if it's a part of any conversation or any lesson that a teacher is going to teach, equity is different than equality. Equality would be if in 5 years, both of those engineers were offered across the board, or shall I say all the engineers were offered across the board $10,000 increase in salary. So that at this point, the male engineer would be at $60,000 and the female engineer would be at $55,000. That's equality. Equity would be putting her up to the point of giving her an additional $5,000 raise so that she can she can be on the same level as she should be as her male counterpart?
Well, I go back to equality, which I believe she should have begun at the same salary and not later be incentivized to bring her up to scale. If
But-
she
but
has
how-
the
how-
same
how do you-
qualifications, and I believe in merit pay. I don't believe that pay should, if you have a female engineer and a male engineer, but the male is more productive and works harder and puts more into his effort, then he should make more money than the female. Not based on their gender, but based on their job performance.
Well, all things being equal, let's just say she outperforms him.
Then she should get better pay. But that's
Okay,
not
and if
equity, that's
they
equality.
perform the same, and one does not receive the pay that they should receive, then what? You just don't think there's any solution? You don't think that that's something that ought to be taken into consideration and students ought to be able to have a serious discussion about it?
I don't think anyone is suggesting that we don't discuss equal opportunities for individuals in the classroom.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Ms. Few. We appreciate you being here and answering the questions and all and listening to the dialogue. Thank you so much.
thank you, Madam Chairman.